So let's start with the questions. Continue to use the same example of store selling barbecue sandwiches, but if you have a better example, you can kind of insert that in this question. Suppose you produce barbecue sandwiches or anything you produce. Now a friend of yours tell you that since the demand for your product, in this case sandwiches, in your area is inelastic, then you should increase the price in order to increase profits. And the question is, should you follow your friend's advice? And when you think about this question a little bit more, you're forced to conclude that in order to follow your friend's advice, you need more information. Because there's two reasons why you may not be able to follow your friend's advice, or even if you follow your friend's advice, you may actually end up with the opposite result. The first one has to do with how large or how many people are competing in the same area that you're selling. So let's say Mike's is selling barbecue sandwiches. Let's say that there's 10 more places selling barbecue sandwiches in downtown, the same type of sandwich. Then even though the demand for barbecue sandwiches could be inelastic in the area where Mike works, Mike's own demand for his sandwiches is not completely inelastic. Because if Mike changes the price of his sandwiches by, let's say, 50 cents, if everyone else, all the other barbecue sandwich places, are selling exactly the same thing, then why would anyone buy it from Mike if they can buy it from someone else for a lower price? So you see that when you work in an area that you face fierce competition, you have a lot of people, then you have very little control over the price. And in essence, the price elasticity of your product is really completely elastic. If you increase the price, you lose all your customers. So therefore, in this particular section, what I want you to think about is the market structure. And in particular, you have to ask yourself two questions. Is the market structure you work in, the industry in which you're selling your good, how many sellers you have? Because if you have a lot of sellers, you will have very little control over the price. The second question is, what are they selling? If those people are all selling the same thing, then we say that all of those firms are what we call price takers instead of price makers. All right? And we call that situation perfect competition. And again, the rationale should be straightforward. If you sell something like corn, that is not, corn selling by farmer A is not that special than corn selling by farmer B. You're competing against many other farmers, so it's a very large market. Everyone's selling exactly the same thing. So in that particular market, each farmer has very little control over the price, because if they increase the price, there's no reason for anyone to buy corn from them. And if they decrease the price, then everyone will respond technically by doing the same thing, and you're not really gaining any new customers. So if you're a farmer in a very competitive market, then you have very little control over the price. You have to take the price from the market and deal with that price and do the best you can with it. So in that situation, we say that firms in a perfect competitive environment are price takers. Now that's a very different situation in which you actually have some degree of control over the price. And for that, you need to somehow sell something in which you have less degree of competition. If Mike sells something that somehow people think is special, then he might be able to change the price because he faces less competition, because the market for that thing that he sells is a lot smaller than if he actually has a lot more competition. So in this week, we're going to talk about the issue of firms working on a perfectly competitive environment. And next week, we're going to talk about situations in which firms have a little more degree of control over the price. But in order for us to generalize a lot of things that we're going to learn about the firm, we have to simplify things a little bit and assume that the firms we're going to be talking about this week are firms working in a perfectly competitive environment. And what that means is that they have no control over the price. They have to take the price from the market and do the best they can with that price, particularly by perhaps changing costs or changing the output. Okay? Now that's not a completely unrealistic assumption, because for some markets, like we said, that assumption of perfect competition make complete sense. Agricultural products, stock markets, stocks in the stock market, you also have a lot of sellers selling that, so people have very little control over the price. So in some markets, you have the perfect competition assumption makes perfect sense. Some other markets, like the retail markets, clothing, food, those markets have a little more control over the price. So those things resemble more of the models we're going to talk about next week. Even though the things that we're going to generalize this week apply for most firms, regardless if they are perfectly competitive or not.
Produced by OCE Atlas Digital Media at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign.